Hello lovelies, welcome back to another sewing tutorial. If this is your first time seeing this channel, my name is Emame and you're very welcome. To all my returning subscribers, thank you so much for stopping by again. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this 4-layered gathered dress. So if this is something you're interested in, if you like how it is looking, let's get right into the video. So these are the fabrics I have for this project. I'll be using this Sunray fabric. It is stretchy and very light and flowy. I have about 3 yards of this and it is by 60 inches in length. And then I'll be using this fabric for the lining piece. So my fabric vendor said this is called metallic, but it could pass as Duchess, except that it is thicker than Duchess. So I have about 1.5 yards, so 1.5 yards of this fabric. So now I'm just going to place it on a fold. So to know the width to place on a fold, I'm going to take my hip circumference measurement and add about 4 inches to it. So that's how much I'm going to fold. So now I'm going to be starting my measurements from 8 inches. This is a tube dress. It is starting from my chest line. So 8 inches is my chest line. So you know how to get your chest measurement, your bust circumference measurement divided by 6 plus 1.5. So from the top edge of the fabric there, I'll come down by 0.5 inches and then I'm going to mark that point down there. So I'll place my tape at 8 inches mark right there. And every other measurement will come from that point, but my tape would be at 8 inches because that is where my chest line starts. So there's no shoulder here, there's no armhole, everything is just from the chest line. So the next line I'm marking out here is my bust point line. So from that 8 inches, I came down by my actual bust point, which is 10.5. And now I'm going to mark my under bust measurement of 14 inches. So still placing the tape at that starting line, leaving that 8 inches mark there, I'm just going to mark my under bust measurement of 14 inches. So ordinarily, the next thing is supposed to be to mark my waist measurement. But now there's going to be a band separating the top or joining the top to the skirt part. So now I'm going to, before I mark my waist measurement, I'm going to mark an allowance of 0.5 inches. So I'll come down from that under bust line by 0.5 inches. So this 0.5 inches is going to be the allowance for the top to join it to the band. So after that first 0.5 inches, I'll come down again by another 0.5 inches and I'll also connect it straight. So now this second 0.5 inches allowance is the allowance to join the band to the top part. So now I can go ahead and mark out my waistline. So placing the tape again on my under bust line, I would skip those 2 allowances I had drawn out, those 2 0.5 inches allowances that sums up to 1 inch. I will skip it and I'll place that 14 inches on the second allowance line and I will mark down my waistline, which is 17 inches. I hope you understand. I'm just skipping those 2 allowances because they will be sewn in. So now I'm marking my waistline of 17 inches. So now after the waistline, I'm going to go ahead and also mark allowances just like I did for the top part. So I'll come down from the waistline by 0.5 inches and then I'll draw a line across. So this 0.5 inches, this first one after the waistline, belongs to the waistline, which is the band. So this is the allowance to connect that band to the skirt part. So I'll also draw another 0.5 inches mark and then this one belongs to the skirt part to connect the skirt to the band. I hope I am clear enough. So now after this, I'm going to go ahead and mark my hip line. So from that second allowance line coming down by 8 inches, which is my hip measurement, I would mark it down there and draw a straight line across. So the next thing will be to take the full length of this dress. So for my chest line, I'll go down by 38 inches. This is what I marked now, but eventually I would reduce it. But for now, I'll work with this. So now I'm just going to go ahead and explain these lines again. So I have my starting line, which is 0.5 inches from the top. So placing my tape at 8 inches on that starting line, I have my bust point line, I have my under bust line, I have those 2 allowances there before the band space, and then I have my waistline. Then I also have the allowances after my waistline. So now I'm going to just be labeling this point band allowance, and I'll be using arrows to indicate how I'll be connecting them. So if I was cutting this on a pattern paper, right, I would not need to do all these plenty allowances. I'll just cut it, and then when I place it on the fabric, I'll go ahead and add 0.5 inches all around. You understand? So that is why when drafting freehand, you have to be extra careful and make sure you include all your allowances so that you don't have issues with shortage when you're sewing down the pieces together. I'll just label my hip line there, and I'll go ahead and take my body measurements. So now on the chest line, which is my starting line, I'll take my bust circumference measurement divided by 4, and I'll add 1 inch for allowance, sewing allowance. On my under bust line, I'll take my under bust measurement divided by 4, which is 32 divided by 4. I have 8 inches. I'll add 1 inch for sewing allowance, and on the waistline, take my waist measurement as well and add 1 inch for sewing allowance. So now on the hip line, I'm going to also take my hip circumference measurement, but this time around I would add 4 inches for allowance. So I'll use 3 inches for ease and then 1 inch for the sewing allowance. So because I need this outfit to be free, so be as free as it looks on the outside, so I can't have the lining piece to be tight. So on the bust point, I'll also take my bust circumference measurement there, and then I'll blend it in, and then I'll just connect the rest of the points together. So now the allowances for the band, I'll just be taking it down straight, and then I'll connect from my under bust to my waistline, and then I'll connect from my waistline to my hip line, and then I'll just take it straight down. So you can cut this as an A line, so just from the waist you can take it as an A line to the end of the dress, but I was kind of mising my fabric here. So I'll go ahead and take my bust dart, which is my side dart. So on my bust point line on the side, I'll come down by 1.5 inches, and then I'll take my nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2. I'll mark it 4 inches, and then I'll connect the line. So now, as you've noticed, I did not take the normal regular dart, the one from the bust to the waist, nipple to nipple measurement. I didn't take that because I'm just going to be working with the side darts for this. So I'll go ahead and close down this side dart so that I can replace whatever shortage I have before I cut it out. So I'll use a pin to just secure it down, and then I'll come in with my ruler, and then I'll just replace the shortage down. So after replacing it, I'll go ahead and cut it out from the lower part all the way to the top. So after cutting the sides out, I'll go ahead and take out the pin from the bust dart, and I will divide the band from the top and the band from the skirt so that I can have 3 pieces. Now I'll just notch that bust dart point so that I can have accurate measurements when I'm sewing it down. I'll take it to my machine and hold it down, and that is it for the front. So now I'll draft the back for this. So I'll place my back on a fold just like I did the front, but with an extra inch for zipper allowance. And from the top, I'll come down by 0.5 inches, which will serve as my starting line and my chest line. So still maintaining that 8-inch mark, which is the chest line, I'll mark my waist measurement for the back, which is 15.5 inches. I'll draw a line across, and then just like I did the front as well, I'm going to be adding allowances after the waistline. So there's going to be a half cut on the back, which is going to be on the waistline. So I'll mark 0.5 inches from the waistline downward. I'll connect the line, and then I'll mark another 0.5 inches after the first one. This one is going to be the allowance for the skirt. So to connect the skirt and the top and the waistline, I'm adding allowances here on the fabric. So afterwards, I'll go ahead and connect and mark my hip measurement, my hip line downwards, which is 8 inches from the waistline, and I'll mark the full length, which is 38 inches, just like I did for the front. Now that I have all my lines drawn out, I'll go ahead and mark my zipper allowance line. So from the folded edge of the fabric, I'll go in by 1 inch all the way from the top to the end of the dress, and then I'll draw a line across and just label it zip allowance. So now the rest of the circumference measurements would come from that zipper allowance line. So now for the back, I'm going to be taking a regular dart here. So on that waistline, I just marked my nipple to nipple measurement, and then I marked it there. And then on the top, which is the chest line, I'll just come down by 1 inch, also mark my bust span measurement there, draw a straight line, and then I'll go on either side of the waistline by 0.5 inches, just a regular dart here, and then I'll connect all the points together. So I won't be taking a dart on the skirt part of this back piece. So I'll go ahead and take my body circumference measurement. On the chest line, I'll measure my bust circumference measurement divided by 4, and I'll add 1 inch for allowance. On the waistline, my waist divided by 4, and I'll replace the dart intake there, which is 1 inch, and I'll also add 1 inch for sewing allowance. Now moving on to the hip, I would mark my hip measurement, and then I would add 4 inches just like I did for the front, 3 inches for ease and 1 inch for sewing allowance. I'll connect all the points together from chest to waist to hip and all the way to the end of the dress. Then I'll cut it out on the side. So the next thing I'll do here is to take out my zip bulge. So on the zip allowance line, on the waistline, I will go in by 0.5 inches. On the allowances too, so I would go in by 0.5 inches on that midpoint of the waist, and then I'll connect it upward into the chest line, just somewhere into the chest line, and then I'll connect it downwards into the hip line, and then I will slash open the rest of the middle back side. So I'll slash it open, and then I'll go ahead and divide the top from the skirt part so that I can have 2 pieces now for the back. I'll just extend the dart lines to the allowance, and now this is it for the back. So I'm going to also I like to take some extra inches off the waist whenever I have a dress that has a half cut, so that it will just take those extra bulges on the zip line area. So I'm just going to go up by 0.5 inches and then connect it somewhere into the midpoint of this fabric. So I'm just going to connect 0.5 inches. I'll cut it out. Then on the skirt part too, I went down by 0.5 inches and I'll cut it out as well, just like this. When you open it up, it looks like a cross here, and when you hold it, everything just sinks in nicely. So I'll go ahead and notch the zip allowance and the dart points as well. Then I'll take it to my machine and sew it down. So here I had sewn down the top side darts and then the back darts too. I had sewn both of them down, and now I'm going to go ahead and cut out the band on the sunray fabric. So this is the fabric I'll be using to make the gathers. So I'll place the band on a fold, and I'll fold the sunray fabric as well, and then I'm going to cut out the band without any allowance because the original band piece already has allowance. Now I am going to reduce the length of the skirt part of the entire dress. So initially I used 38 inches, so I'm just going to take off 3.5 inches from the lower part because I don't want it to be the same length as the sunray fabric. I want the gathered fabric to be longer than the lining piece. So I'm just going to take off 3.5 inches on the front and the back. So now for this back piece, after holding the dart on the top, I have some shortage on the skirt part. I cut it together with the same allowance, right? So there's a little shortage because I did not hold down that on the skirt. So I'm just going to trim off that little piece out. So you can hold your dart if you want, but I decided not to. Now to proceed with the rest of the dress, I'm going to cut out those ruffled pieces. So the gathered pieces, I'm going to cut it out. Now I'll first of all draw out some lines on the main lining piece to indicate where I'll be sewing down the gathered pieces. So I'm going to have 4 lines here. So the first one will just be on the starting line, on the waistline down there, and then the next one will be 2 inches above, and then the next one will be another 2 inches above. So I'm going to have 4 lines with a distance of 2 inches. So as you can see, this is the front top piece, and the gathers are going to be facing upward. So they are going to start from the waistline upward. So I have 2 inches. I have the first line on the waistline, the next is 2 inches above it, the third line is 2 inches, and the next one is 2 inches above. So distance of 2 inches between all the lines. I'm just going to label them 1, 2, 3, 4 for clarity. So now I would go ahead and cut out the sunray fabric that I'll be using to make the gathers on these lines. Now I would first of all measure the widest part of my top, which is my bust point area. I'll measure it so that I can get the width of the fabric I'm going to cut out. So after measuring it out, it was about 22 inches. So I'll multiply it by 2 to get 44 inches. So I'm going to be cutting out with a width of 44 inches. And the length is going to be 4 inches. So I'm cutting it by 4 inches because I want them to overlap each other. So for all the 4 pieces I'll cut out to make the gathers on this top, is going to be 4 by 44 inches. So 4 inches in length, 44 inches in width. So I'll place this fabric on a fold so that it will be easier to work with and so that I can achieve straight lines. Right now it is on a fold and the entire length is 44 inches if I open it up. So I'll go ahead and mark 4 inches downward. So this 4 inches is going to be for the length of the ruffles. So 4 inches by 44 inches like I have been saying. So I'll cut it across and then I'm going to go ahead and cut out 3 more pieces to make up 4 pieces. So this is it after cutting everything out. I have all 4 pieces arranged here. And then I'm just going to show you how it is going to look on here. So I'm going to place the 4th one at the top. The next one will be on the 3rd line I drew. And then the 2nd one will come and overlap it here. And the first one is going to be on this waistline. So see how they are overlapping each other. This is how it is going to be when I sew it down. So except that it will have ruffles, of course. So now for the skirt piece, I'm just going to cut out almost the same thing I did for the top, except that this one is going to be with a distance of 7 inches. So from the waistline of the skirt, I'll come down by 7 inches. I'll mark that point. I'll draw a line across. Then from that 7 inches mark, I'll come down again by another 7 inches. I'll mark it and I'll draw a line across, just like what I did for the top, except the top was by 2 inches. Okay, so now I'll come down by 7 inches again for the last line and I'll draw it across. So now I'm going to be sewing them on the waistline, the first line I drew there, the 2nd and the 3rd line. But before I sew this down, I'm going to have to join the front and the back skirt pieces together. So taking my waist measurement and then 1 inch from the hip down, I'm just going to join the sides together. So this is it after joining it together. Now I will just replicate the lines I have on the front of the skirt. I'll just replicate it on the back. So those 7-inch distance lines, I'll just mark it on the back so that I can have straight lines all around the skirt piece. So I'm doing this because the ruffles is not going to have any joining on the side. It is going to extend from one midpoint of the back to the other midpoint. Is going like round in a circle. So I'm just going to be sewing it straight like I'm showing you here. I'll go ahead and cut out the pieces of fabric for the gathers. So I'll be using about 2.5 yards. So that is about 90 inches plus an extra 2 inches for zipper allowance because it is going to be connecting at the center back of the skirt, which is going to have, a joining. So I'll be leaving 2 inches for zipper. So everything all around here is about 92 inches. Now I'm just going to fold it up so that I can work with it easily. Please, if you've watched up to this point, kindly give this video a like, also share and subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Alright, so now you remember when I drew out the lines for the skirt part, I gave a distance of 7 inches, right? So I'm going to be cutting out the length of the fabric I'm going to be cutting it out with a length of 9 inches because I need them to overlap each other just like I did for the top. So I'm just cutting out 9 inches in length for all the 4 pieces. So they're going to be 9 inches in length by 92 inches in width all round. So after cutting it, I have all the pieces here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now I'm just going to show you how I was able to gather the pieces together, how I was able to gather the fabric. I'll just pin it down on one side, take it to my machine, and then I'll start picking it. I'll just be picking small pleats, just like I'm making scattered pleats. So it is advisable at this point to just, it's better to run your gathers and then you measure the distance you want it to be and then arrange it that way and sew it on it. But I just decided to pick it while sewing on the machine, just to pick it here. So this is how I gathered all the pieces, the top pieces, the skirt pieces. This is how I made my gathers for this. So now this is it. After I was done with the skirt part, I'm just showing you how everything looks nice, and I'll go ahead and do the same thing for the top. But for the top, the gathers are facing upward, so they're going to start from the waistline all the way to the chest line. Now I have my top piece sewn down, all the ruffles on there nicely gathered. So I have my top here, I have the band, and I have the skirt piece. I'll first of all connect the band. I'll first of all join the band to the top piece. So I'll place it right sides facing, then I'll pin it down, and then I'll sew a straight line across. So now after sewing the main band to the top, I'm going to sew the lining of the band now. So I didn't sew them together. So I'm just going to place the lining piece right sides facing the wrong side of the top, and then I'll pin it down. And then I'll go ahead and sew it. So while I'm sewing, I will try to sew close to the edge, as close to the edge as possible, so that I don't sew into the main fabric. So when I turn it to the right side, I don't start seeing seams from this lining piece, from sewing this lining piece down. I hope you understand what I mean. So this is it. So it is looking clean on the outside. I sewed it like this so that I can use this lining to cover up the seam. So now the next thing to do is to join the sides of the top together. So I'm just going to bring the back pieces of the top and join it to the front pieces so that it will be easier for me to attach it to the skirt, because the skirt is already one piece, because I had already joined the sides of the skirt earlier. So I'll just make sure that the lining pieces of the top, both the front and the back lining pieces, are aligned together, and then I'll pin it down. Also, I'll be arranging the ruffles in front, so I'll be sewing some of the ruffles into the side so that they can stay in place. So after pinning one side down, I'll open it up just to show you how it looks on the inside, and then I would also pin down the other side, making sure the ruffles are arranged, and then the right sides of the back facing the right sides of the front, pin it down. So now I'll go ahead and just pin down my zipper allowance of 1 inch so that it can just be firm and secure while I take my measurements, my body measurements. So on the chest line, I'll take my bust circumference divided by 2, and then I'll mark that point down. And then on the waistline, I'll also take my waist measurement divided by 2. I'll mark it there, and then I'll just connect the point. It doesn't have so much allowance, so I'll just connect. Remember, it was only 1 inch I kept initially. So now this is it. After it has been sewn down, I'll take out the pins, and now it is time to attach the top to the skirt part. So placing them together, I'll just place them right sides facing, and then I will pin from one end, one open end on the zipper allowance, to the other end of the zipper allowance. So I'll just pin it all around, and then I'll go ahead and sew it just straight down here. So now after sewing it down, this is it. The next thing to do is to just fix my zipper, and we're almost done with this. So I'm also going to be sewing the part below the zipper, the back side. So I'll be joining it together as well. So now this is it. After everything is done, I fixed the zipper, I've closed the lower part. So if you notice, I did not hem the ends of this fabric. I did not hem the ends of the sunray. That's because this fabric does not fray. So if you're using a different fabric that frays, you might want to weave it or fold in the ends. And now for the top part, this fabric is very light, so it might be falling off. The ruffles might not stay in place, so I just decided to use my needle, hand needle and thread, to just stack it so that it will be secure. And that is it for this dress. This is how it came out looking. Very beautiful, very nice, very comfortable. Please, if you watched up to this point, if you learned a thing or two from this video, kindly give this video a thumbs up, share this video, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Now, if you'd like to see the tutorial for this hair bow on my hair, I'll leave the link to that in the description. Thank you so much for watching up to this point. I'm so grateful that you stayed up till here. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.